faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Talks Books. Today I'm introducing a book called The Hot Zone. Its subtitle is The Terrifying True Story of the Ebola Virus. Ebola is a virus from Africa with a fatality rate 4,000 times higher than the flu. Its most dangerous variant has a fatality rate as high as 90%. So it's nicknamed the eraser of life. The damage that AIDS inflicts on a person over 10 years, Ebola can do in just 10 days. You could say, compared to Ebola, AIDS is like a toy. In 2014, Ebola broke out in West African countries. At that time, 27,000 people were infected or suspected infected, and ultimately 6,000 died. But this wasn't its only appearance in the human world. Since 1976, it has been like a venomous snake, repeatedly emerging suddenly in the human world and mysteriously disappearing. It can travel globally via airplanes. And it even appeared twice in the heart of America, as described in The Hot Zone. This book was first published in 1994, documenting the story of humans discovering Ebola and fighting it from 1976 to 1993. This isn't a dry Ebola manual. It's more like a nonfiction novel depicting how a new deadly virus pierced through human history. People's helplessness and fear, and all fear stems from the unknown. And the author, Richard Preston, is a contributor to the famous magazine, The New Yorker. He flew around the world interviewing over a dozen of the people who know Ebola best. He even ventured into Ebola's lair himself, ultimately completing this masterpiece. After publication, it remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 15 consecutive months. Preston also won the American CDC's Public Health Service Award for this book, becoming the first non-physician ever to receive it. What exactly is Ebola? Where does it come from? And how did it spread from Africa to America? How do humans fight it? Now, let's start with chapter 1 of The Hot Zone. Stephen King, the master of horror, once said, "The first chapter of The Hot Zone is the most terrifying thing I've ever read." This chapter tells the story of Charles Monet. Monet was a 56-year-old Frenchman who lived reclusively in a small cabin in Western Kenya, Africa. He liked animals, but not people. Few interacted with him, and no one knew his past. Oh, back in the Christmas holiday of 1980, Monet asked a local female friend to join him on a trip to a place called Mount Elgon. Ah, camping trip. Remember Mount Elgon? It's Ebola's lair, sitting right between Uganda and Kenya, a massive extinct volcano. Up in the mountains, Monet and his lady friend explored a cave named Kitum. Oh, it's a petrified tropical rainforest scene, filled with animal traces, elephants, bats, rabbits, and insects. This cave was like a subway station, different species mingling in a confined space, perfect for viruses to spread. Nobody knows what Monet touched in that cave, or if he got a cut. Years later, they tracked down Monet's female friend. She was alive, but Monet had already died under mysterious circumstances. Oh, 7 days after coming back from Elgon Cave, Monet felt throbbing pain behind his eyes. Then it spread to his temples. He was hit with headaches, back pain, followed by nausea, high fever, and vomiting. Monet turned all cold and sluggish, blank-faced, eyes bright red, looking more and more like a zombie. Colleagues visited him and realized he couldn't recall where he was. Folks took him to a local private hospital, but docs couldn't figure it out, so they suggested heading to a hospital in Nairobi, Kenya's capital. Back then, money could still walk. Colleagues put him on a Kenya Airways flight. Seats were cramped. He hunched over, vomiting nonstop, filling bags with black, coffee ground-like fluid. The cabin reeked like a slaughterhouse. The vomiting must have ruptured his nasal vessels because he started bleeding uncontrollably from the nose. For the other passengers, that flight must have felt endless. By the time he got off the plane, Monet was drenched in blood. Experts later explained that the virus multiplies fast, causing blood to clot inside patients. Clots build up in the brain, damaging it and wiping out personality. You could say Monet's soul was gone by then, just his body going through motions, and he was a walking virus bomb. When he walked into Nairobi Hospital's waiting room, that bomb went off. He collapsed, spewing huge amounts of blood. Blood gushed from his anus, too, mixed with gut tissue. He expelled his own internal virus along with his organs, joyfully splattering blood everywhere, seeking the next host. A doctor rushed over, quickly tore open Monet's shirt, and stuck his hand into Monet's mouth to examine the oral cavity. And right at that moment, Monet jerked upright and vomited again, the vomit spraying directly into the doctor's eyes and mouth. Well, we can guess what happened next. 9 days later, this doctor started experiencing full body pain. His eyes turned red, he became expressionless, and bled uncontrollably during treatment, almost dying. People sent the doctor's serum to major laboratories worldwide. After a few days of testing, the results came out. He was infected with a virus called Marburg. Marburg virus is a variant of Ebola. It's a long, thread-like virus, so it's also called a filovirus. Morphologically, the vast majority of viruses on Earth are spherical. But back then, only 3 filamentous viruses had been discovered: Marburg virus, Sudan Ebola virus, and Zaire Ebola virus. They're also known as the Ebola sisters, the deadliest killers in the virus world. In terms of lethality, the youngest sister, Marburg virus, is the gentlest, with a fatality rate of 1 in 4. Next is Sudan Ebola with a 50% fatality rate. The most ferocious is the eldest sister, Zaire Ebola, with a fatality rate as high as 90%. These 3 filamentous viruses attack all organs and tissues in the human body except skeletal muscles and bones. An author has seen reports that Ebola survivors are almost all bald or have patchy hair loss because their hair follicles necrotized. And those unfortunate people die like Monet did. Genetically, Ebola might be a life form as ancient as Earth itself. Its homeland is in Africa's tropical rainforest regions. For thousands of years, it never left the rainforest, so it remained unknown to humans. However, in 1976, all 3 filoviruses of the Ebola family simultaneously appeared in human society for the first time, specifically Marburg in Germany, Sudan, and Zaire in Africa, which is how they got their names. Ebola's first appearance caused massive casualties in human society. For example, in Sudan, as soon as it appeared, it infected an entire hospital, killing hundreds and turning the hospital into a morgue. In Zaire, it simultaneously infected 55 villages and wiped out 90% of the infected. Ebola suddenly appeared 40 years ago, and the author believes it's closely tied to human activities. In recent years, human activities keep encroaching on tropical rainforests, the world's deepest species reservoir housing most Earth's flora and fauna, and also the largest virus reservoir. They peacefully inhabit animals that don't react to them. But human activities damage rainforest edges, allowing these viruses to emerge from disturbed zones. No one knows which animal originally hosted this virus. Flies, bats, lions, or elephants, all possible. During the 2014 West African Ebola outbreak, tracing the source seemed to progress. People suspect patient 0 was a 2-year-old bitten by a fruit bat, the world's largest bat species, originating from tropical rainforests. Coincidentally, Ebola and HIV viruses share nearly identical African origins. At Mount Elgon, where Monet visited, a highway leads to human society. Just like filoviruses, AIDS also emerged from here. With so many infected along its route, it's even called AIDS Highway. The author suggests AIDS and Ebola might be nature's self-balancing tools. It can't sustain 7 billion humans spreading limitlessly, so it's fighting back. And Ebola and AIDS may just be the beginning. After Ebola entered human society, certain behaviors accelerated its spread. For example, poor hygiene. In Sudan and Zaire outbreaks, a key pattern emerged. Hospitals didn't sterilize needles, just occasionally rinsed with hot water. Needles contaminated with countless blood samples created perfect transmission conditions. Meanwhile, monkey trading in science's name opened Ebola's gateway to civilized society. Take the first filovirus outbreak in Marburg, Germany. It originated from African green monkeys bought by a pharmaceutical factory. These monkeys were used for vaccine research. Hard to believe, but export inspections were shockingly lax. A veterinary inspector admitted, before export, monkeys got just one visual check. Right under this inspector's watch, monkeys carrying the Marburg virus slipped through. Even more unbelievably, even after sick monkeys were culled, they might still get shipped back to developed countries. This inspector revealed that the sick monkeys he picked out were supposed to be killed, but often ended up in cages and released on some little island. When monkeys were in short supply, merchants would dig them up again and sell them off. Later, we'll cover how the same batch of sick monkeys actually got sent to Washington, D.C. twice. All right, at this point, let's take a quick recap of what we just went over. Mummy's death shows how brutal Ebola is. It's got 3 variants from Africa, spread to civilization through monkey trade, fueled by human greed and carelessness. When Ebola emerged in 1976, humanity began its fight against it. But this path wasn't easy. Against the savage Ebola, any person or precaution felt utterly fragile. Joe McCormick was one of the earliest Ebola fighters, working for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. In the late 70s, he volunteered to go to southern Sudan during an Ebola outbreak to collect blood samples from infected folks for research. He remembers landing in Sudan at dusk. The pilot was too scared to step out of the cabin, only promising to sleep inside. They take off at dawn. Joe and a colleague found a hut in the village holding Ebola patients. Dark moans coming from inside. No one dared go near. But Joe walked right in. He saw pairs of blood-red eyes staring back, the whole place reeking of blood. Some were convulsing, others lay still, bleeding nonstop. He put on rubber gloves, a paper surgical gown, mask, and shoe covers, then started drawing blood from patients, kneeling and working all night in that hut. During that, a convulsing old woman stuck a just-used needle into Joe's thumb. Suspected of infection, he was stuck there. After observing locally for 4 days, Joe found the old woman, and he just had malaria. He'd escaped death's doorstep. Danger wasn't just in African huts, it was the same in American labs. Back then, 2 U.S. institutions researched Ebola. One was the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, where Joe worked. The other was the Army's Institute of Infectious Diseases. The Disease Research Institute is divided into 4 zones based on risk levels, with Ebola in the most dangerous one, riskier than AIDS or SARS, because it's got no treatment or vaccine, so researchers got to rely on protective suits for safety. In the Ebola work zone, they've got experimental monkeys injected with the virus, isolated behind thick glass like in an aquarium. But when cleaning staff spot something off with the monkeys, they stick a little note on the glass. It's a reminder for researchers to go check it out, and that's when they suit up. The protective suit has 2 layers. One's a snug surgical gown, and the other's a sealed suit with a helmet. Once suited up, it's like being an astronaut in space. Tape is a must-have gear, because leaks can pop up anytime on the suit, so you gotta tape them shut. Gloves are the weakest spot. Researchers wear 3 layers of gloves and wrap them tight with tape. But even if you tape the whole body down, it still ain't foolproof. There's a researcher named Nancy in the lab. Once, mid-dissection of a dead monkey, she found a cut on her palm. Ebola-infected blood seeped in. Nancy kept calm, walked out, and dashed to decon to check for infection. Just 10 minutes, but it felt like forever to her. If you're confirmed infected, you're locked in isolation and dead in a week. She couldn't bear thinking, if she was gone, who'd care for her 2 kids? She still had the maid's wages to pay. Lucky for her, the outer gloves ripped, but the inner one held up. Stuff like that, not uncommon in Ebola labs. Nancy's coworkers even bring charms into the lab, hoping it'll keep the virus away, because it's so risky. Folks in other departments call Ebola researchers crazy. Nancy's boss has researched Ebola half his life. For years, same nightmare. Suited up, holding Ebola liquid, and it splashes on his gloves. And the gloves are full of pinholes. He wakes up yelling, drenched in sweat. But the biggest problem fighting Ebola ain't the danger. It's the lack of progress. Researchers, well, most of the time can only run tests on monkeys repeatedly, trying to find patterns. But even then, it's hard to pin down Ebola's transmission routes. We can only figure out Ebola's spread by studying existing cases. For instance, in the 1976 outbreak, they found it spreads through physical contact, sex, blood, and even from corpses to the living. Like in Zaire, families hugged and kissed the dead, then got sick. What other ways? Then during the 2014 West African outbreak, besides blood, semen, breast milk, they found it spreads via saliva, sweat, and urine. So can Ebola spread through air? This is the lab's most vital research topic, but there's no clear answer. We mentioned Joe McCormick went to Sudan. He spent days in Ebola huts without catching it. So he insists Ebola can't be airborne. But in Nancy's lab, healthy monkeys were separated from sick ones by a wide gap. Yet soon after, the healthy monkeys got infected. How did the virus cross that space? Maybe monkey drool, flung objects, or possibly through air. And if airborne, it could infect whole buildings through AC systems, like a nuke threat to any city. Meanwhile, Ebola vanished for a decade outside labs. Researchers hit dead ends exploring possibilities. Then, in 1987, the Disease Institute got Kenyan serum from a 10-year-old Danish boy. Tests confirmed Marburg virus. Weeks earlier, the boy had visited family in Kenya. After returning, his eyes reddened, skin turned purple-black, and he bled out. Tracing his steps, they made a shocking find. Hidden cave on Mount Elgon, the very cave that infected Monet. Researchers were thrilled. Seeing Marburg's lair, they decided right then to investigate. They hauled 20 crates of biohazard gear and lab equipment, sending 30-plus people to Africa. They went into the cave repeatedly, collecting blood samples from almost all animals, insects, birds, rodents, rabbits, bats, but found no trace of Marburg. They tested nearby humans too. Still nothing. They came up empty-handed, returned dejectedly, tossed equipment into the basement, and couldn't even bring themselves to write a report. All right, so far we've seen Ebola research demands immense courage and luck. These bravest humans might spend lifetimes in futile efforts, unable to pinpoint transmission routes or origins, let alone cure it. Facing Ebola is like fighting a beast in the dark, utterly powerless. Rather than us studying it, it's Ebola-eyeing humanity. The virus always holds the upper hand. Don't kid yourself thinking this is just some distant African tale. In 1989, Ebola strutted right into America's capital area twice. How'd that happen? Let's zoom in on a place called Reston. In Virginia, bordering Washington, D.C., a company importing lab animals turned an office building into a monkey house. In October 1989, they received 100 wild monkeys shipped from the Philippines. Yeah, you noticed. Monkeys again. When delivered, 2 were dead, not unusual. Long journeys always claim some monkeys, but over 2 weeks, deaths piled up. At 29 dead, staff and vets grew uneasy. They sent samples to the Army's disease lab. Results: filovirus, closest to Zaire Ebola with its 90% fatality rate. Africa's terror goddess suddenly appeared in humanity's most concentrated civilization hub. Researchers were terrified, facing potentially America's worst biological disaster. Before this, no one had seen an infectious disease that made people bleed to death. How officials handled it? Pure chaos, full of arguments and contradictions. First question: who's in charge? As we mentioned, America's top Ebola experts are in two agencies: CDC and Army Disease Research. One's health system, one's military. Their duties overlap, both fighting for control. They argued at the same table. Compromise. Army handles monkeys, CDC handles infected humans. Another critical issue: whether to go public, how to face media. They chose secrecy. If people knew this virus's power, cars fleeing DC would gridlock every road. Panicked moms would scream at cameras. They couldn't let fear cripple people before infection did, so they lied. When Washington Post caught wind, they gave interviews claiming situation controlled, animals destroyed, faking safety. A boring illusion of safety. They also ordered staff. No leaving Monkey House in suits, no telling anyone what you're doing. Thus, an unprecedented biodefense military operation unfolded near Washington, completely unknown to the public. So how'd they execute it? Generally, three ways to stop viruses: vaccines, drugs, or biocontainment. But Ebola has no vaccines or drugs. Only containment works. Containment has two types: quarantine monkeys to die off naturally, or euthanize them and sterilize the facility. They chose mercy, euthanasia. At Army Research, vets knew monkeys best. They formed a squad to enter. Zero virus experience, but no time. These young squad members slipped into inflatable suits, wrapped tape thick around ankles. If suits tore, patch it fast. Pure chaos, but speed was everything. Their mission? In the infected room with 65 monkeys, inject each with anesthesia, sedatives, then lethal drugs. All died within a day, but the virus survived. 3 days later, more monkeys got infected. To ensure total safety, they had to euthanize all 450 monkeys. After that, they scrubbed the building with chemical solutions, scraping off even a layer of floor paint. I then sealed it with tape and fumigated for 3 days, becoming the world's only building devoid of all life. So were they safe now? Actually, this crisis ended peacefully, largely because Ebola showed unprecedented traits. Like not attacking humans, but it also proved transmissible through air. One day, after the military squad moved in, a monkey house caretaker suddenly ran to the lawn, vomiting, convulsing, retching sounds echoing through the parking lot. People panicked and rushed him to isolation. The tests proved, he wasn't infected. Beyond that, no one else reacted. Stranger still, within a month, newly arrived Philippine monkeys at the reopened facility developed identical Ebola symptoms: lethargy, agony, bleeding to death. Since last outbreak caused no human casualties, officials chose quarantine over intervention, letting monkeys die naturally. Ebola indeed wiped them out quickly. But during this, 4 caretakers tested positive for Ebola with 0 symptoms. Eventually, the virus vanished from their bodies. Researchers were stunned. Why did this virus, identical to Zaire Ebola in appearance, equally brutal to monkeys, spare humans? People braced for mass casualties. But the killer sheathed its blade at the last moment, leaving behind a Mona Lisa smile. Since it behaved unlike any known filovirus, they named this new variant Reston. Ebola filoviruses have 7 proteins, 4 completely unknown to humans. Maybe a tiny structural change in one radically altered its human impact, but this defies all patterns. Researchers fear this will lull people into complacency. Next time they see a filovirus under the microscope, someone might say, just Reston Ebola, and take it out of containment. But what if it was its big sister, Zaire Ebola? Another confirmed trait of Reston Ebola is airborne transmission. Monkeys on every floor got infected. The virus definitely traveled through ventilation ducts. Caretakers never touched monkey blood but still got infected. Clear airborne spread. In this sense, rest in Ebola might be the deadliest filovirus. If its structure shifts slightly to target humans, it could eliminate us through coughs, as convenient as the flu but 4,000 times deadlier. What terrifies us about rest in Ebola is its unpredictability. It chooses when to attack and masters every transmission route. The virus holds all power. We're at its mercy. And you might have noticed, this Ebola came from Asia, not Africa. Why? Rumors say wealthy Filipinos own rainforest estates. They illegally import African animals, release them for hunting. Maybe Ebola hitched a ride inside those beasts to Asia. All right, that wraps up part 3. This time, Ebola left Africa for America's urban core. We saw how officials fought it, agency turf wars, media blackouts. Ebola proved even more elusive, choosing whether to infect humans, confirmed airborne. The book's account stops here. Back in 1993, the author predicted Ebola would return. Sure enough, in 2014, Ebola exploded historically, sweeping through 27,000 people in West Africa. And yet, compared to Ebola's potential, this was just a trial run. Thankfully, in December 2016, Canada's Public Health Agency created the first Ebola vaccine. After 40 years, humanity finally built its first fence against Ebola. But we still can't relax. We've merely found our first shield in the dark. Victory remains distant. And how many brutal killers like Ebola are lurking in nature? We're in a vast unknown. Ignorance and carelessness will only kill us faster. So that's the content of the Hot Zone book. Let's review together. In part 1, through Momet's story, we felt Ebola's terrifying power. We learned what Ebola is, its variants, where it came from, and what humans did wrong to lure it out of the rainforest. In part 2, we saw how tough fighting Ebola is. It's dangerous work, equipment's flimsier than you'd think, and Ebola's elusive source, transmission, and treatment are all unknowns. In part 3, we saw Ebola not just in Africa, but also popping up unexpectedly in America. In bustling areas and with a new variant that's airborne. Through this crisis response, we saw how officials reacted, handling agency squabbles, hiding truths from the public, and coping with Ebola's attack in chaos. After seeing it all, you realize it was Ebola that showed mercy. Its mysterious retreat let humans narrowly escape. All right, the Hot Zone. That's the interpretation of this book for you. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.